I'm going to attach a link to a clip placed for an hour, 28 minutes, and 20 seconds. Most of you won't watch any of it, but you probably should. And I've said this in virtually hundreds of videos over the years. We never went to the moon. And this clip is about exactly that. Let me just expand this so I can read it better. The Apollo program, also known as Project Apollo, was the United States human spaceflight program led by NASA, which landed the first human on the moon in 1969. Apollo was conceived during Project Mercury and executed after Project Gemini. Why it's impossible humans landed on the moon. Mikoya Kaku. Join physicist Mikoya Kaku as he examines one of history's greatest achievements through a scientific lens. In a provocative 2-hour exploration, discover why the 1969 moon landing seems almost impossible when you analyze the physics, technology, and challenges involved. I'll play about 15 to 20 minutes of it, but you'll have it there to watch in its entirety.
People don't think about. We're told that in 1969, humans landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong took that famous first step. Buzz Aldrin followed. The whole world watched on television. It's one of the defining moments of human history. But here's the thing. When you actually look at the physics, when you calculate the energies involved, when you analyze the technology they had available, when you consider the radiation, the temperatures, the computational power, you start to ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. How did they actually pull this off? Now, before you think I'm some conspiracy theorist, let me be clear. I'm a physicist. I work on string theory at the City University of New York. I believe in evidence. I believe in mathematics. I believe in the scientific method. And that's exactly why this question fascinates me. Because when you do the math, when you look at the engineering challenges, the moon landing seems almost impossible. Think about it. In 1969, the most powerful computer available to NASA had less computing power than your smartphone. In fact, the Apollo guidance computer had 64 kilobytes of memory. 64 kilobytes. Your smartphone has millions of times more memory than that. The entire Apollo program was navigated with less computational power than a modern calculator. And yet, somehow, they calculated trajectories to the moon with pinpoint accuracy. They navigated through space. They landed on the lunar surface. They took off again. They rendezvoused with the command module in orbit. They came back to Earth, all with a computer less powerful than the chip in your car key. Now, how is that possible? Well, let me explain something about orbital mechanics. When you're trying to get to the moon, you're not just pointing a rocket and firing. You're dealing with what we call the three-body problem. You have the Earth, you have the moon, and you have your spacecraft. Each one is pulling on the others with gravity. And the mathematics of the three-body problem are notoriously difficult. In fact, there's no exact solution to the three-body problem. You can't write down a simple equation that tells you exactly where everything will be at any given time. You have to use approximations. You have to use numerical methods. You have to run complex calculations again and again. And in 1969, they did this with 64 kilobytes of memory. Think about that for a moment. Modern scientists with supercomputers millions of times more powerful still struggle with orbital mechanics. We use massive computational resources to calculate satellite trajectories. And yet NASA, with 1,960 seconds technology, nailed it on the first try. Well, actually, not the first try. There were the Apollo 8, 9, and 10 missions that tested various components, but still, the margin for error was incredibly small. And they succeeded every single time after Apollo 13's famous accident. They brought the astronauts home safely. So the question isn't whether the moon landings happened. The question is how. How did they overcome challenges that seem almost insurmountable? Let me give you another example. Radiation. Space is filled with radiation. Cosmic rays, solar wind, radiation trapped in the Earth's magnetosphere. When you leave Earth's protective magnetic field, you're exposed to enormous amounts of radiation. Now, the Apollo spacecraft had aluminum walls. Aluminum. That's it. The command module was essentially a thin aluminum can, and the astronauts spent days in space traveling to the moon and back, protected only by this thin metal shell. Let me tell you something about radiation shielding. To effectively block high-energy cosmic rays, you need thick shielding. Lead, concrete, water-dense materials that can absorb the radiation. A few millimeters of aluminum, that's not going to do much against cosmic rays. And then there's the Van Allen radiation belts. These are zones of intense radiation surrounding Earth, discovered by James Van Allen in 1958. The belts contain high-energy protons and electrons trapped by Earth's magnetic field. And to get to the moon, you have to pass through them. Now, NASA says the astronauts passed through the Van Allen belts quickly, spending only about an hour in the most intense regions, and that the radiation dose was manageable. And you know what? The math actually supports this. If you calculate the radiation exposure for a fast transit through the belts, it comes out to something humans can survive. But here's what's interesting. In 2014, NASA released a video where one of their engineers said that we need to solve the radiation problem before we can send humans beyond low Earth orbit. He said, and I quote, "We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space." Wait a minute. We must solve these challenges? But we already sent people through this region of space 12 times in the Apollo program. So what's he talking about? Well, the answer is complicated. Modern safety standards are much stricter than they were in the 1,960 seconds. Today, we want to minimize radiation exposure as much as possible. In the 1,960 seconds, they were willing to accept higher risks. The astronauts knew they were being exposed to radiation. They accepted it. It was part of the job. But still, it raises an interesting question. If we did it in 1969 with primitive technology, why is it so hard now? Why are we acting like it's some unsolved problem? Let me tell you another thing that bothers me. The temperatures on the moon. During the lunar day, which lasts about 2 weeks, temperatures on the surface reach 127 degrees Celsius. That's 260 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to boil water. And during the lunar night, temperatures drop to minus 173 degrees Celsius. That's minus 280 Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide. Now, the Apollo astronauts landed during the lunar morning, when temperatures were relatively moderate. But still, they were dealing with extreme heat. The lunar surface was baking in direct sunlight, no atmosphere to diffuse the heat, no clouds to provide shade. Just raw, intense solar radiation. And their spacesuits? They had a cooling system, yes, water-cooled garments worn under the suit. But think about the engineering challenge. You're designing a suit that has to keep a human comfortable in extreme heat, while also being flexible enough to allow movement, strong enough to maintain pressure, and light enough to be practical. And they pulled it off. The suits worked. The astronauts didn't overheat. They didn't freeze. They worked on the lunar surface for hours at a time. It's remarkable. Almost too remarkable. Now, let me talk about something else. The lunar module, this was the spacecraft that actually landed on the moon. And when you look at it, it's not impressive. It looks like it was built in someone's garage. Thin metal walls, foil-like covering, spindly legs. It looks fragile. It looks primitive. And yet, this thing had to descend from lunar orbit, land on an unknown surface, then take off again and rendezvous with the command module, all with a rocket engine that had never been tested in lunar conditions. All controlled by astronauts using manual controls and that primitive computer. Think about what's involved in landing on the moon. You're descending in 1/6 gravity. Your engine is firing to slow you down. You're trying to find a safe landing spot. You have limited fuel. If you run out before you land, you crash. If you land too hard, you crash. If you land on a slope, you tip over. And they did this 6 times successfully, every single time. Armstrong had to manually fly the Eagle to avoid a boulder field. He landed with less than 30 seconds of fuel remaining. 30 seconds, that's how close they came to disaster. And the other missions, they all landed safely. No crashes, no disasters. Every landing was successful. Now, that's either incredible skill and luck, or something else is going on. Let me give you another example. The photographs. The Apollo astronauts took thousands of photographs on the moon. Beautiful, clear, perfectly exposed photographs. And they did this with film cameras, Hasselblad cameras modified for lunar conditions. Now, think about what's involved in photography. You need the right exposure. Too much light, the image is washed out. Too little light, it's too dark. You need the right focus. You need to hold the camera steady. And the astronauts were doing this while wearing bulky spacesuits with thick gloves. They couldn't look through a viewfinder. They had cameras mounted on their chests. They were essentially shooting blind. And yet, almost every photograph is perfectly framed, perfectly exposed, perfectly focused. How professional photographers working in comfortable conditions with modern equipment would struggle to achieve that success rate. And yet astronauts in bulky suits on the moon nailed it almost every time. Now, NASA's answer is that they trained extensively. They practiced for months. They knew exactly how to set the camera for lunar conditions. And, okay, that makes sense. But still, the success rate is remarkable. And then there's the film itself. Photographic film is sensitive to radiation. Cosmic rays can fog, film, create artifacts, ruin images, and yet the Apollo film survived. The images are clear, no significant radiation damage. How do they protect the film? How do they ensure it wouldn't be ruined by the intense radiation of space? These are the questions that keep me up at night. Not because I think the moon landings were faked, but because I want to understand how they actually did it, how they overcame challenges that seem almost insurmountable. You see, when I was 8 years old, I saw the Apollo missions on television. I watched Armstrong step onto the moon, and I was inspired. I thought, if we can do that, we can do anything. It sparked my interest in science. It made me want to become a physicist. And now, decades later, as I understand more about the physics, the engineering, the challenges involved, I'm even more impressed. Because what they accomplished was extraordinary, almost miraculous. But here's what really gets me. We haven't been back. It's been over 50 years since the last moon landing. We've sent robots to Mars. We've built the International Space Station. We've launched telescopes that can see to the edge of the universe. But we haven't sent humans back to the moon. Why not? If we did it in 1969 with primitive technology, it should be easy now, right? We have better computers, better materials, better rockets. So why haven't we gone back? The official answer is money. It's expensive. There's no pressing need. We can do most science with robots. And okay, those are all valid points. But still, you'd think that in 50 years, someone would have wanted to go back. China, Russia, Europe, private companies, someone would have done it by now. Unless it's harder than we think. Unless the challenges are greater than we realized. Unless there's something about the moon landings that we don't fully understand. Now, let me talk about the rocket equation. This is fundamental to space travel. It's called the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation, after the Russian scientist who first formulated it, and it tells you how much fuel you need to reach a certain velocity. The problem is, it's exponential. If you want to go faster, you don't just need more fuel, you need exponentially more fuel, and that fuel has mass. So you need more fuel to lift the fuel. It's a vicious cycle. To escape Earth's gravity, you need to reach about 11 kilometers per second. That's 25,000 miles per hour. And to do that, you need a rocket that's mostly fuel. The Saturn V rocket that launched the Apollo missions was 85% fuel by mass. Only 15% was the actual spacecraft and payload, and they did this in the 1,960 seconds. They built the most powerful rocket ever made. 3,000 tons of thrust, and it worked. Every single time it launched, it worked. No catastrophic failures, no explosions on the launch pad. Now, compare that to today. We're still struggling to build reliable heavy-lift rockets. SpaceX's Starship has had multiple test failures. NASA's Space Launch System is years behind schedule and billions over budget. And yet, in the 1,960 seconds, they built the Saturn V, and it worked on the first try. How? How did they achieve that level of reliability with 1,960 seconds technology? With slide rules instead of computers, with less advanced materials, with less experience? The answer, according to NASA, is that they had unlimited resources. The Apollo program cost over $25 billion in 1,960 seconds money. That's over $150 billion in today's dollars. They had the best engineers, the best facilities, the full support of the government, and they were motivated by the Cold War. They had to beat the Soviets to the moon. And okay, that makes sense. When you throw enough money and talent at a problem, you can solve it. But still, the engineering achievement is staggering. They essentially invented the technology as they went along. Fuel cells, life support systems, spacesuits, lunar rovers, all of it was brand new. And it all worked. Let me tell you about another challenge. Communication. The moon is about 240,000 miles from Earth. Radio signals travel at the speed of light, which means there's about a 1.3 second delay each way. So when Mission Control talked to the astronauts, there was a 2.6 second round trip delay. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but think about landing on the moon. You're descending, you're looking for a landing spot. Mission Control is monitoring your fuel, your altitude, your velocity. And there's a 2.6 second delay in all communications. If something goes wrong, Mission Control can't help you in real time. By the time they see the problem and send a command, it's too late. The astronauts have to make split-second decisions on their own. And they did. Armstrong manually flew the lunar module to avoid a boulder field. He had seconds to make that decision. No time to consult with Mission Control. He just did it. And it worked. That takes incredible skill, incredible training, incredible courage. And the fact that it worked is testament to the quality of the astronauts and the mission planners. But it also raises a question. How many things could have gone wrong? How many potential failures were there? And how did they avoid all of them? You see, space travel is unforgiving. There's no margin for error. A tiny leak in a spacesuit means death. A malfunction in the life support system means death. A problem with the rocket engine means death. Everything has to work perfectly every single time. And in the Apollo program, with a few exceptions like Apollo 13, everything did work. The odds of that are remarkably small. It's like flipping a coin 100 times and getting heads every single time. Possible, yes, but unlikely. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying it's remarkable that it did happen. The engineering, the planning, the execution, all of it had to be perfect, and it was. Let me talk about something else that fascinates me. The flag. You've all seen the images. The American flag planted on the lunar surface. And in some of the footage, the flag appears to be waving, moving in the wind. But wait, there's no atmosphere on the moon, no air, no wind. So how can the flag be waving? Now, skeptics jump on this and say, aha, proof that it was filmed on Earth. But the explanation is actually simple. The flag had a horizontal rod at the top to keep it extended, And when the astronauts planted the pole, they twisted it back and forth to drive it into the ground. That twisting motion made the flag wave. And in the vacuum of the moon, with no air resistance, the flag kept moving for a while. It's physics, simple physics. But it looks weird because we're not used to seeing flags in a vacuum. On Earth, a flag would stop moving almost immediately because air resistance would damp the motion. But on the moon, the flag keeps oscillating. So the waving flag isn't evidence of a hoax. It's evidence that they really were in a vacuum. It's evidence that they really were on the moon. But here's what's interesting. The fact that people question this shows how counterintuitive space is, how different it is from our everyday experience. And that's exactly why the moon landings seem impossible. Because they required mastering an environment completely unlike anything on Earth.
I want to stop this at the 19 minute and 20 second. I'll probably do another segment for my own curiosity. Pass along, folks. I told you it was all bullshit. NASA was nothing but a money pit, which is what it is right now.